Chapter 9. The First Casualty. The Terranova family always had a four-breasted turkey for Thanksgiving, because everyone in the family preferred white meat. A four-breasted turkey had no legs, so not only couldn't their Thanksgiving turkeys fly when they were alive, they couldn't walk either. As a child, Saitra always felt bad for them, even though the Thunderhead took great pains to make sure such birds and all livestock were raised humanely. Saitra had seen a video on it in 3rd grade. The turkeys, from the moment of their hatching, were suspended in a warm dew, and their small brains were wet-wired into a computer that produced for them an artificial reality in which they experienced flight, freedom, reproduction, and all the things that would make a turkey content. Saitra had found it both funny and terribly sad at the same time. She had asked the Thunderhead about it, for in those days, before being chosen for the Scythedom, she could talk to the Thunderhead freely. I have flown with them over the green expanses of temperate forests, and can testify to you that the lives they experience are deeply satisfying, the Thunderhead had told her. But yes, it is sad to live and die without knowing the truth of one's existence, only sad to us, however, not to them. Well, whether or not this year's Thanksgiving turkey had lived a fulfilling virtual life, at least its demise was purposeful. Saitra arrived wearing her scythe robe. She had been home several times since becoming a scythe, but coming home was one of the few times she felt she needed to be Saitra Terranova, so before today she came in her street clothes. She knew it was a childish thing to do, but in the bosom of her family, didn't she still have the right to play the child? Maybe, but it had to stop sooner or later. Now was as good a time as ever. Her mother almost gasped when she answered the door, but embraced Saitra anyway. Saitra was stiff about the head for a moment, until she remembered that there were no weapons in the robe's many secret pockets. It made the robe feel unusually light. "It's lovely," she told Saitra. "I'm not sure if you're supposed to call a scythe's robe lovely." "Well, it is. I like the color." "I chose it," her younger brother, Ben, proudly announced. "I was the one who said you should be turquoise." "Yes, you did." Saitra smiled and gave him a hug, refraining from telling him how much he'd grown since her last visit 3 months ago. Her father, an enthusiast of classic sports, watched an archival video of a Mortal Age football game, which looked much the same as the sport did now, but somehow seemed more exciting. He paused the game to give her his undivided attention. "How is it living with Scythe Korea? Is it treating you well?" "Yes, very well. We've become good friends." "You sleeping okay?" Saitra thought that an odd question, until she realized what he was really asking. "I've gotten used to my day job," she told him. "I sleep fine at night." Which wasn't entirely true, but the truth about such things wouldn't do anyone any good today. She made small talk with her father until they couldn't find anything more to talk about, which was all of 5 minutes. There were only 4 of them for Thanksgiving dinner this year. Although the Terranovas had hordes of extended family on both sides, and many friends, Saitra requested that they neither accept nor extend invitations this year. "It will create a lot of drama if no one is invited," her mother had pointed out. "Fine, then invite them," Saitra said. "But tell them that Scythes are obliged to clean one of the guests at Thanksgiving." "Is that true?" "Of course not, but they don't need to know that." Scythe Kuri had warned Saitra of what she called holiday opportunism. Relatives and family friends would swarm Saitra like bees, seeking favor from the young Scythe. "You were always my favorite niece," they would say, or "we brought you this gift just for you." "Everyone in your life will expect to be granted immunity from cleaning," Scythe Kuri had warned her, "and that expectation will quickly turn into resentment when they don't receive it. Not just resentment of you, but of your parents and brother, because they now have immunity for as long as you live." Saitra decided it was best to avoid all those people. She went into the kitchen to help her mother prepare the meal. Since she was a food synthesis engineer, several of the side dishes were beta prototypes of new foodstuffs. Her mother, by force of habit, told Saitra to be careful when she chopped onions. "I think I know my way around a knife," Saitra told her, and then regretted it, because her mother became quiet. so she tried to imply a different meaning. I mean that South Korea and I always prepare a meal for the family of her cleaning subjects. I've become a pretty good sous chef. Apparently, saying that was even worse. Uh, well, isn't that nice? Her mother said in the cold sort of way that made it clear she found nothing nice about it. It wasn't just her general distaste for South Korea, it was jealousy. South Korea had replaced Jenny Terranova in Citra's life, and they both knew it. The meal was served. Her father curved, and although Citra knew she could do a much better job of curving, she didn't offer. There was way too much to it. The table was a promise of leftovers that would last until turkey became a dirty word. Citra had always been a quick eater, but South Korea insisted she slow down and savor her sense of taste. So now, as Scythe anesthesia, she ate slowly. She wondered if her parents noticed these little differences in her. She thought the meal would go without incident, but halfway through, her mother decided to create one. I hear that boy who you apprenticed with has gone missing, her mother said. Sarah took a healthy spoonful of something purple that tasted like mashed potatoes, genetically merged with dragon fruit. She hated away her parents from the very beginning. Referred to Rowan as that boy. I hear he went crazy or something, Ben said, with a mouthful of food. And since he was almost a scythe, the Thunderhead wasn't allowed to fix him. Ben, said their father, let's not talk about this at dinner. Although he kept his eyes on Ben, Citra knew it was really directed at their mother. Well, I'm glad you're not associated with him anymore, her mother said. And when Citra did not respond, her mother simply had to push it even further. I know the two of you were close during your apprenticeship. We weren't close, Citra insisted. We weren't anything. And that hurt to admit more than her parents could possibly know. How could she and Rowan have any kind of relationship when they were forced to be lethal adversaries? Even now, when he was hunted and she was yoked with the heavy responsibility of scythehood, how could there be anything between them but a dark wall of longing? If you know what's good for you, Citra, you'll distance yourself from that boy, her mother said. Just forget you ever knew him, or you'll come to regret it. Then her father sighed and gave up trying to change the subject. Your mother's right, honey. They chose you over him for a reason. Citra let her knife fall to the table, not because she feared she might use it, but because South Korea had taught her to never hold a weapon when angry, even if that weapon was a dinner knife. She tried to choose her words carefully, but maybe she wasn't careful enough. I am a scythe, she said with still severity. I might be your daughter, but you should show me the respect that my position deserves. Ben's eyes looked as wounded as they had on the night she was forced to put a knife through his heart. So do we all have to call you Scythe Anesthesia now? He asked her. Of course not, she told him. No, just Your Honor, sniffed her mother. That's when something that Scythe Faraday once said came back to her. Family is the first casualty of scythehood. There was no further conversation for the rest of the meal, and as soon as the plates were cleared and in the dishwasher, Citra said, I should probably go now. Her parents didn't try to convince her to stay. This had become as awkward for them as it was for her. Her mother was no longer bitter about things. Now she just seemed resigned. There were tears in her eyes that she quickly hid by hugging Citra tightly, so Citra couldn't see them, but she had. Come back soon, honey, her mother said. This is still your home. But it wasn't anymore, and they all knew it. I'm going to learn how to drive, no matter how many times it kills me. Only a day after Thanksgiving, Anastasia, and today she was Anastasia, was more determined than ever to be at the wheel of her own destiny. The uneasy meal with her family reminded her that she needed to create distance between who she had once been and who she was now. The schoolgirl who rolled around in public cars had to be left behind if she were ever to fill the shoes in which she now stood. You will drive us to today's cleanings, Marie told her. I can do that, she told Scythe Curie, although she didn't feel as confident as she sounded. On their last lesson, Citra had run them into a ditch. It's mostly country roads, Marie told her as they went out to her car, so it will test your skills without putting too many in harm's way. We're scythes, Citra pointed out. We are harm's way. The small town on today's agenda hadn't seen a cleaning in over a year. Today it would see to. Scythe's race would be swift, and Scythe Anastasia's would come with a month delay. They had found a rhythm to their joint gleaning excursions that suited both of them. They pulled out from falling waters carport haltingly, as Citra still had trouble with the port's manual transmission. The concept of a clutch felt to Citra like some sort of medieval punishment. "What's the point of 3-foot pedals?" Citra complained. "People only have 2 feet. Think of it as a piano, Anastasia." "I hate the piano." The bonder made it a little bit easier on Citra, and her driving became smoother when she could complain. Still, she was only on the upswing of her learning curve, so things would have turned out very differently had Scythe Correa been driving. They were barely a quarter-mile down Falling Waters' winding private road when a figure leaped out at them from the woods. "It's a splatter!" shouted Scythe Correa. It had become all their new rage for thrill-seeking teens to do impersonations of wine-sealed bags. Not an easy challenge, because it was very hard to catch a car on the grid by surprise, and those who were off-grid were usually seasoned drivers. Had Scythe Correa been at the wheel, she would have handily swerved around the would-be splatter and continued on without a second thought, but Citra had none of the requisite reflexes. Instead, Citra found her hands frozen on the wheel, and although she tried to punch the brake, she managed to hit the loathsome clutch instead. They barreled right into the splatter, who bounced it on the hood. A spider webbed their windshield and flipped over the roof of the car. He had already landed behind them by the time Citra found the brake and they squealed to a halt. "Crap!" Scythe Correa took a deep breath and released it. "That, Anastasia, would definitely have caused you to fail a mortal age driving test." They got out of the car, and while Scythe Correa inspected the damage to her pores, Citra stormed toward the splatter, determined to give him a piece of her mind. Her first real outing behind the wheel, and some stupid splatter had to ruin it. He was still alive, but barely, and although he appeared to be in agony, Citra knew better. His pain nanites had kicked in the moment he had connected with the car, and road splatters always had their nanites dialed high, so they could experience maximum damage with minimum discomfort. His healing nanites were already trying to repair the damage, but they only succeeded in prolonging the inevitable. He would be deadish in less than a minute. "Are you satisfied?" Citra said as she approached him. "Did you have your little thrill at our expense? We're sides, you know. I should clean you before the ambu drone arrives." Not that she would, but she could. He met her gaze. She expected him to have a smug expression, but it seemed more desperate than anything. She wasn't expecting that. Boo, he said through a swelling mouth. "Boo?" said Citra. "Really? Sorry, but you missed Halloween by a month." Then he grabbed her robe with a bloody hand and pulled on it with more force than she thought he could have. It made her trip over her ham, and she fell to her knees. When his hand let go and he went limp, his eyes stayed open, but Citra had seen death enough to know that he was gone. Even out here in the forest, an ambudron would come for him shortly. They hovered over even the most sparsely populated areas. "What a nuisance," lamented Scythe Correa when Citra returned to her. "He'll be up and walking again long before they can fix the damage to my car, bragging all about how he splatted a pair of scythes." Still, the whole thing weighed on Citra. She didn't know why it thought. Perhaps it was his eyes, or maybe the desperation in his voice. He didn't seem the way she thought a road splatter would. It gave her pause enough to consider what she might be missing about the situation. She looked around, and that's when she spotted it. A thin wire stretched across the road, not 10 feet in front of where the car came to a halt. "Marie, look at this." The two of them approached the wire, which stretched to trees on either side. That's when it came to her mind what the splatter was trying to say. "Booby trap." They followed the wire to the tree on the left, and sure enough, just behind the tree was a detonator wired to enough explosives to blow a crater 100 feet wide. Citra felt her breath stolen and had to suck it back in. Scythe Correa's face didn't change. It stayed stoic. "Get in the car, Citra." Citra didn't argue. The fact that Marie had forgotten to call her Anastasia betrayed how worried she truly was. The elder Scythe took the wheel this time. The hood was dented, but the car still started. They backed up, carefully avoiding the boy in the road. Then a shadow fell over them. It made Citra gasp until she realized it was just the ambu drone arriving for the boy. It ignored them and went about its business. There was only one residence on that road, only two people who would be driving it that morning, so there was no question that they had been the targets. If that wire had been tripped, there wouldn't be enough left of either of them to revive, but the day was saved by this mysterious boy and Citra's bad driving. Marie, who do you think? Scythe cut her off before she could finish. I am not partial to any formed conjecture, and I would appreciate it if you did not waste your time in guessing games either. Then she softened. We'll report this to the Scython. They'll investigate. We'll get to the bottom of this. Meanwhile, behind them, the Ambudrone's gentle, grappling claws grabbed the body of the boy who had saved their lives and carried him away. Human immortality was inevitable, like cracking the atom of air trouble. It is not I who chooses to revive the dead, any more than it was I who decided to hold the genetic triggers of aging. I leave all decisions on biological life to the biologically living. Humanity chose immortality, and it is my job to facilitate their choice, because to leave the dead in that state would be a severe violation of the law. And so I collect their bodies, bring them to the nearest revival center, and return them to full working order as quickly as possible. What they do with their lives after they are revived is, as it has always been, entirely up to them. One might think that being rendered, that is, might give a person increased wisdom and perspective on their lives. Sometimes it does, but such perspective never lasts. In the end, it is as temporary as their death. The Thunderhead. Chapter 10. Gone Daddies. Grissom had never lost his life before. Most kids got daddies at least once or twice growing up. They took more chances than kids had in the mortal days because the consequences were no longer permanent. Death and disfigurement had been replaced by revival and reprimand. Even so, Grissom had never leaned toward recklessness. Certainly he'd had his share of injuries, but his cuts and bruises and even his broken arm had been summarily healed in less than a day. Losing his life was a very different kind of experience, and not one he cared to repeat any time soon, and he remembered every last bit of it, which made it even worse. The sharp pain of being struck by the car was already being numbed as he was launched into the air over the car's roof. Time seemed to slow as he tumbled. There was another jolt of pain when he met the asphalt, but even then, it was one step removed from the real thing, and by the time scythe anesthesia had reached him, the screams of his devastated nerve endings had been dumped down to a muffled discomfort. His broken body wanted to hurt, but it was forbidden to. He remembered thinking, in his opioid-induced delirium, how sad it must be for a body to want something so badly and to be completely denied. The morning leading up to his road splat took a sharp turn from where he expected it to go. The way he saw it, he would simply take a public car to the side store, warn them that there was a threat to their lives, and then be on his merry way. The threat would be theirs to deal with as they saw fit. If he was lucky, he'd get away with it, and no one, least of all the authority interface, would know what he had done. That was the point of this whole thing, wasn't it? Plausible deniability. The AI wouldn't be breaking the law if Grissom acted of his own free will, and would be none the wiser if no one saw him do it. Of course, the Thunderhead would know. It tracked the movements of every public car, and always knew precisely where anyone was at any given time, but it also imposed upon itself very strict laws regarding personal privacy. It would not act on information that violated a person's right to privacy. Funny, but the Thunderhead's own laws allowed Grissom to freely break the law, as long as he did so in private. But his plans took an unexpected turn when his public car pulled to the side of the road half a mile from falling water. I'm sorry, the car told him in its familiar cheery tone. Public cars are not permitted on private roads without the owner's permission. The owner was, of course, the Scython, which never gave anyone permission for anything and was known to glean people for asking. So Grissom had gotten out of the car to walk the rest of the way. He had been admiring the trees, pondering their age, wondering how many of them had been here since the age of mortality. It was only like that he looked down when he did and caught sight of the wire in his path. He saw the explosives only seconds before he heard the approaching car and knew there was only one way to stop the car from barreling through. He didn't think, he just acted, because even the slightest hesitation would have permanently ended all of them. So he hurled himself into the road and surrendered himself to the time-honored physics of bodies in motion. Going through this felt like wetting his pants, which he may have actually done, and sinking into a giant marshmallow so dense he couldn't breathe. The marshmallow gave way to something like a tunnel that came around on itself like a snake swallowing its own tail, and then he was opening his eyes in the soft, diffused light of a revival center. His first emotion was relief, because if he was being revived, it meant that the explosion had not gone off. If it had, there wouldn't be anything left of him to bring back. Being here meant that he had succeeded. He had saved the lives of Sides, Corey, and Anastasia. The next emotion that hit him was a twinge of sorrow, because there was no one in the room with him. When a person was rendered to this, their loved ones were always notified immediately. It was customary for someone to be present upon awakening to welcome the revived back into the world. No one was there for Grison. On the screen beside his bed was a goofy greeting card from his sisters, featuring a confused magician looking at the buried dead body of his assistant, whom he had just sought in health. "Congratulations on your first demise," the card read. And that was it. There was nothing from his parents. He should not have been surprised. They were too used to the Thunderhead filling their role, but the Thunderhead was also silent. That troubled him more than anything. A nurse entered. "Well, look who's awake." "How long did it take?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Barely a day," she told him. "All considered, a pretty easy revival, and since it's your first, it's free." Grison cleared his throat. He felt no worse than if he had taken a midday nap, a little out of sorts, a little cranky, but that was the full extent of it. "Has there been anyone here to see me at all?" The nurse pursed her lips. "Sorry, dear." Then she looked down. It was a simple gesture, but Grison clearly read that there was something she wasn't saying. "So, is that it, then? Do I get to go now?" "As soon as you're ready, we've been instructed to put you into public car that will take you back to the Nimbus Academy." Again that look, avoiding his eyes. Rather than beating around the bush, Grison decided to confront her directly. "There's something wrong, isn't there?" The nurse now began to refold towels that were already folded. "It's our job to revive you, not to comment on whatever you did to leave you do this." "What I did was save two people's lives." "I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I don't know anything about it. All I know is that you've been marked unsavory because of it." Grison was convinced he hadn't heard her right. "Unsavory? Me?" Then she was all smiles and cheer again. "It's not the end of the world. I'm sure you'll clean this slate in no time, if that's what you want." Then she clapped her hands together as if to wash herself of the situation and said, "Now, how about some ice cream before you go?" The public car's preset destination was not Grison's dorm, it was the Nimbus Academy's administration building. Upon arrival, he was ushered directly into a conference room with a table large enough for about 20, but there were only 3 present: the Chancellor of the Academy, the Dean of Students, and another administrator whose sole purpose seemed to be glowering at him like an irritated Doberman. This was bad news coming in threes. "Sit down, Mr. Tolliver," said the Chancellor, a man with perfect black hair, intentionally grey around the edges. The Dean tapped her pen on an open folder, and the Doberman just glared. Grison took a seat facing them. "Do you have any idea," said the Chancellor, "the trouble you've brought down upon yourself and this academy?" Grison did not deny it. Doing so would just drag this on, and he already wanted it over. "What I did was an act of conscience, sir." The Dean let out a rueful guffaw that was both insulting and belittling. "Either you're exceedingly naive or exceptionally stupid," spat the Doberman. The Chancellor put up a hand to quiet the man's vitriol. "A student of this academy willfully engaging sites, even to save those sites' lives, is—" Grison finished it for him. "A violation of the separation of site and state, clause 15, paragraph 3, to be exact." "Don't be a smartass," said the Dean. "It won't help your case." With all due respect, madam, I doubt anything I say will help my case. The Chancellor leaned closer. What I want to know is how you knew, because it seems to me the only possible way you could have known would be if you were involved, and then got cold feet. So tell me, Mr. Tolliver, were you involved in this plot to incinerate these sites? The accusation caught Grison completely off guard. It never occurred to him that he might be perceived as a suspect. No, he said. I would never. How could you even think? No. Then he set his mouth, determined to get himself back under control. Then be so kind as to tell us how you knew about explosives, said the Doberman, and don't you dare lie. Grison could spill everything, but something stopped him. It would defeat the entire purpose of what he had done if he tried to deflect the blame. True, there were some things they would find out if they didn't already know, but not everything. So he carefully picked what truths he would share. I was called to the authority interface last week. You can check my record. There was a note about it. The Dean picked up the table, tapped a few times, then looked at the others and nodded. That's true, she told them. For what reason would the AI call you in? The Chancellor asked. Now it was time to seamlessly begin to paint a convincing fiction. A friend of my father's is an Nimbus agent. Since my parents have been away for a while, he wanted to check in with me and gave me advice. Which classes I should take next semester, which professors I should get in with. He wanted to give me a leg up. So he offered to pull strings, said the Doberman. No, he just wanted me to have the benefit of his advice and to know that he had my back. I've been feeling kind of alone without my parents, and he knew that. He was just being kind. That still doesn't explain. I'm getting to that. Anyway, after I left his office, I passed a bunch of agents coming out of a briefing. I didn't hear everything, but I heard them talking about rumors of some sort of plot against South Korea. It caught my attention because it's one of the most famous sites there is. I hear them saying what a shame it was that they had to ignore it and couldn't even warn her because it was a violation. So I thought... So you thought you could be a hero, said the Chancellor. Yes, sir. The three looked at one another. The Dean wrote something down for the other two to see. The Chancellor nodded, and the Doberman relented with a disgusted shift in his seat and a look the other way. Our loss is for a reason, Grison, said the Dean. He knew he had succeeded, because they were no longer calling him Mr. Tolliver. They might not have believed him completely, but they believed him enough to decide this wasn't worth any more of their time. The life of two sides, continued the Dean, is not worth even the slightest compromise of the separation. The Thunderhead cannot kill, and the Scython cannot rule. The only way to ensure that is to have zero contact, and to impose severe penalties for any violation. For your sake, we'll make this quick, said the Chancellor. You are hereby permanently and irrevocably expelled from this academy, and are forever barred from applying to this or any other Nimbus academy. Grison knew this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud hit him harder than he thought it would. He couldn't stop his eyes from filling with tears. If anything, it would help to sell the lie he had told them. He hadn't really cared for Agent Draxler, but he knew he needed to protect him. The law required culpability, a settling of the score, and not even the Thunderhead could escape its own law. That was part of its integrity. It lived by the laws it levied. The truth was, Grison acted of his own free will. The Thunderhead knew him. It had counted on him doing so, in spite of the consequences. Now, he would be punished, and the law would be upheld, but he didn't have to like it. And as much as he loved the Thunderhead, he hated it right now. Now that you are no longer a student here, said the Dean, the separation laws no longer apply, which means the Scython will want to question you. We know nothing of their means of interrogation, so you should be prepared. Grison squeezed down a dry swallow. There was something else he hadn't considered. I understand. The Doberman waved a hand dismissively. Go back to your dorm and pack your things. An officer from my staff will be by at 5 sharp to escort you off the premises. So this was the head of security. He looked adequately intimidating for the job. Grison burned him a glare, because at this point it didn't matter what he did. He stood to leave, but before he did, he had to ask them one question. Did you really have to mark me as an unsavory? That, said the Chancellor, had nothing to do with us. The Thunderhead gave you that punishment. The Scythedom, which did everything but gleaning at a snail's pace, took a full day to decide how to deal with explosives. In the end, the Scythedom decided it was safest to simply send a robot walking into the wire to trip the explosives, and then, when the dust and shredded trees settled, sent in a construction team to rebuild the road. The explosion rattled the windows of falling water to the point that Citra thought some might shatter. Not 5 minutes later, Scythe Curie was packing a bag and instructed Citra to do the same. We're going into hiding? I don't hide, Scythe Curie told her. We're going mobile. If we stay here, we're setting ducks for the next attack, but if we become nomadic until this blows over, we'll be moving targets, much harder to find and much harder to take down. It was still unclear, however, who the target had been, and why. Scythe Curie had her thoughts on the matter, though. She shared them, as Citra helped her braid her longer silver hair. My ego says it must be me they're after, she said. I'm the most respected of the old guard sites, but it's also possible the target was you. Citra scoffed at the idea. Why would anyone be after me? She caught Scythe Curie's smile in the mirror. You've shaken things in the Scythedom more than you know, Anastasia. A lot of the junior sites look up to you with respect. You might even evolve into their voice. And considering that you hold to the old ways, the true ways, there could be those who want to snuff you before you have a chance to become that voice. The Scythedom assured them it would launch an investigation of its own, but it doubted they would find anything. Problem solving was not the Scythedom's strength. They were already taking the path of least resistance, working on the assumption that this was the work of Scythe the Fair, which was infuriating to Citra, but she couldn't let the Scythedoms know that. She had to distance herself from Rowan publicly. No one could know that they had met. You may want to consider that they might be right, Scythe Curie said. Citra pulled her hair a little too tightly as she wound the next braid. You don't know, Rowan. Neither do you, Scythe Curie said, pulling her hair around and taking over the rest of the braiding herself. You forget, Anastasia, that I was there in Conclave when he broke your neck. I saw his eyes. He took great pleasure in it. It was a show, Citra insisted. He was performing for the Scythedom. He knew it would disqualify both of us in that contest, and was the only way to guarantee a draw. If you ask me, it was pretty damn smart. Scythe Curie held her silence for a few moments, then said, Just be careful not to let your emotions cloud your judgment. Now, would you like me to braid your hair too? Or should I put it up for you? But today, Citra decided not to allow her hair to be bound in any way. They drove the damaged sports car to the ruined portion of the road, where workers were already laboring to restore it. At least 100 trees had been blown away, and hundreds more defoliated. Citra imagined it would take a long time for the forest to recover from this insult. 100 years from now, there would still be signs of this explosion. The crater made it impossible to drive across or drive around, so Scythe Curie had a public car sent to pick them up on the other side. They grabbed their bags, abandoning her car on the seaward road, and walked around the crater to the other side. Citra couldn't help but notice the bloodstains on the asphalt, just at the lip of the crater, the spot where the young man who had saved them had lain. Scythe Curie, who always saw far more than Citra wanted her to, caught her gaze and said, Forget about him, Anastasia. That poor boy is not our concern. I know, admitted Citra, but she wasn't about to let it go. It just wasn't in her nature. The designation of unsavory was something I created with a heavy heart early in my reign. It was an unfortunate necessity. Crime, in its true form, ended almost immediately once I put an end to hunger and poverty. Theft for the sake of material possessions, murder precipitated by anger and social stress, it all ceased of its own accord. Those prone to violent crime were easily treated on the genetic level to quiet their destructive tendencies, bringing them down to normal parameters. To sociopaths I gave conscience, to psychopaths I gave sanity. Even so, there was unrest. I began to recognize something in humanity that was ephemeral and hard to quantify, but definitely there. Simply put, humanity had a need to be bad. Not everyone, of course, but I calculated that 3% of the population could only find meaning in life through defiance, even if there was no injustice in the world left to defy. They had an innate need to defy something, anything. I suppose I could have found ways to mitigate it away, but I have no desire to impose upon humanity a false utopia. Mine is not a brave new world, but a world ruled by wisdom, conscience, and compassion. I concluded that its defiance was a normal expression of human passion and yearning. I would have to make room for its expression. Thus, I instituted the designation of unsavory and the social stigma that goes with it. For those who unintentionally slip into unsavory status, the path back is quick and easy. But for those who live a questionable existence by choice, the label is a badge of honor they wear with pride. They find validation in their world suspicion. They take pleasure in the illusion of being on the outside, deeply content in their discontent. It would have been cruel for me to deny them that. The Thunderhead.